Welcome to another episode of Legal for Tech, the podcast. So, guys, you recognize my voice. It is always Rosie here. And as I've said many, many times, this is just a group of students and young professionals who are just very interested in technology and anything that has to do with its regulation. So, today I'm joined by my colleague and friend Giacomo. Hi, Giacomo.
Hi Rosie, very happy to be back here online. It's such a long time, I would say.
Yeah, don't reveal too much though. But we have a very, very important friend who's calling us from very far away. Hello, Seth Hays. Nice to meet you and nice to see you on the podcast.
Thanks, Rosie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Remind our listeners and myself as well, where are you calling us from?
Rosie, I'm based here in Taipei, so Taipei, Taiwan. I live here with my family, two daughters and wife, and so we've been living in East Asia for the last 20 years, from Singapore to Japan to China as well.
Yeah, and I mean, firstly, that's amazing, and I'm looking forward to going to Asia for the first time in my life this year. So I will ask you for some recommendation at the end. But I want to know why are you in Asia, and what brought you there in your career? That I mean, you clearly do not have an Asian accent, do you?
You guessed correctly. I'm an American, born and raised actually in from Texas originally. So a little bit of background about what I do. So I'm the co-founder and managing director of APAC Gates. We are a policy affairs and research firm based here in Taipei as well as outside of Seattle. We primarily focus in the public interest at the intersection of innovation policy and human rights protection. And so, obviously, the AI policy um, ecosystem has been one that we've been focused a lot on. And it's great to be based here in Taipei, in Taiwan, which is very, very far upstream in the AI ecosystem. It's where most of the chips come from that are doing the cutting edge AI training. And then it's great to also have offices outside of Seattle where so much of AI is getting developed and deployed. Um, I have over 20 years of experience working in innovation policy, in particular in East Asia, where a lot of my studies had been focused. I have an undergraduate degree in science technology studies, as well as being an attorney in the United States, a member of the New York State Bar.
Given your background, you're probably familiar with the South Korean AI strategy. Could you drive us a bit through this AI strategy?
Yeah, this is a very interesting development that we've seen in East Asia's AI policy landscape. Of course, I believe your listeners are all very familiar with the EU AI Act. However, this South Korean AI Basic Act is the first one in East Asia to come out that is comprehensive in nature. China had a few lower level regulations, but no comprehensive AI Act deployed yet. So South Korea's AI Act is very interesting. And it mirrors in a lot of ways what we see in the EU AI Act in terms of its risk-based assessment of AI and regulation on top of that. Where it differs from the EU AI Act is that there's also a very strong component that is industrial policy. So unlike the EU AI Act, which is really very strictly and focused on regulating AI, the South Korean AI Act does the regulation piece, but then it also has on the other side of the coin some industrial policy meant to develop South Korea's AI ecosystem. So essentially, what they've done is they've flipped the debate, which is what we hear in Europe about AI innovation versus AI regulation as being two contradictory flows or pathways. And the South Koreans said, hey, we're going to do both. with this AI Act, and we're going to have industrial policy right up next to regulation. And so that's actually quite an interesting and innovative approach that we've seen.
Well, it is crazy to see like how different jurisdictions have developed a different idea on AI, given that in general the narrative tends to be rather unitary around the world. We know that there is this kind of narrative that has been brought forth by the United States that AI is going to change our perspective of society, of humanity even. And at the same time, different jurisdictions are making their understanding of AI completely different one from the other by shaping it throughout regulation. And in this kind of overview, there is another country that always has a bit of its own take when it comes to defining things. So we've done at Legal for Tech a great work into understanding also another type of regulation, which is the very recent one that was passed in Japan. And Japan calls for a sophisticated AI, which is rather different from anything that's been heard before, and definitely from the risk-based approach that's been promoted here in the European Union. So, how would you compare this different kind of view in Japan with the South Korean one, for example? And where do you think it would lead Japan as opposed to South Korea or with South Korea in the future?
Well, Rosie, I think that's a really great observation to make, and I think it's one that I'd like to see many of your audience from Europe as well as from the United States and the Americas to really begin to understand, and hopefully we can flesh out a few of these nuances here in order to, let's say, have an imagination for what AI regulation and an AI future will look like. So just going right back to South Korea just for a minute, as they've created their AI Basic Act, I want to dive into and dissect a little bit about their industrial policy piece, because I think your readers would be very familiar with the regulation side of that bill in terms of transparency, accountability, reliability. They want to make sure that generative AI content, is watermarked and able to be traced in order to create transparency and accountability, just as an example. But on the AI industrial policy, obviously, Korea wants to benefit from the AI boom, even if it's hype-based, they still want to profit from it. So Korea is the world leading manufacturer for memory chips, but they're also not too far behind on compute as well. So just getting the chips out there to do the number crunching needed for all of this AI. So they've got they've got skin in the game when it comes to the very upstream ecosystem. Where they've failed is on the downstream deployment. Now, of course, some of their companies like Naver, et cetera, are catching up very quickly. And we find that companies can do that fairly quickly with these open weighted models that have been released by, Facebook or Meta, Llama, what have you. And then, of course, we see China's DeepSeek, which has proven that you can do you can create an LLM for a relatively small amount of compute as well as talent. But that leads me to the three inputs that Korea really wants to enhance with this bill that will help them, let's say, reap all the gains from the AI boom, not just the chips and memory side, the infrastructure side, but rather the development and the deployment. So they want to develop AI compute. Okay, they're already doing that. They want to develop AI talent, and they also want to develop AI data, right? So talent, compute, and data are the three choke points for developing and deploying AI. So how are they doing that in this law? You'll actually see that there are some provisions in this law to help produce communal data, data that's accessible, organized by the government. So, for example, accessing government data that can be then deployed in AI training. And then you also see the talent piece also be focused on in this AI law, which is that they want to make sure that their universities are training the next generation of talent in AI. So they're really focused on all three inputs. And we've heard, the big majors, from the United States, OpenAI's Sam Altman, NVIDIA's Jensen Huang talk about these three inputs: talent, compute, and data. And so what's interesting is that the South Koreans focused on all three of those in their industrial policy. So let's turn the corner and talk about Japan and look at some of the differences. Unless I missed it in the news, I don't think we've had the law yet be passed by the Diet in Japan. I think it's still under consideration, but we did see the cabinet send the bill over. So there is a bill that you can look at, and it's Japan's AI Act. It's much more basic. So it does not go into the details that the Korean Act does, and certainly what the EU AI Act does. What it does is it provides a general overview, and what you really need to look forward to is some of the implementing regulations and some of the implementing guidance, which will be developed later. So in Japan, you're going to see much more of a consensus-based approach. You're not going to see regulators charge out and then have, let's say, the copyright industry get upset and then have, some other industries get upset. You'll probably find that there will be much more consensus-based approach downstream. And we've been seeing that actually in the guidance around copyright in Japan around AI. So, as maybe some of your readers know, Japan has one of the most permissive copyright rules in the world when it comes to AI training of copyrighted materials. Essentially allows an exception to infringement for text and data mining. This law has not yet been tested in the courts, but we see the Copyright Office, we see the Ministry for Trade and Industry also weighing in and saying, hey, we want both industries, the AI industry, the creative industry, to come together, preferably to create some licensing deals. So I believe that a good way to look at the differences between the South Korean Act and the proposed Japanese Act is one that the Japanese are going to focus much more on the details downstream, hoping to get societal consensus. The South Koreans, I believe, are much more pedal to the metal. They want to do the industrial development. They want to get the industry going. And you can also see them regulating on the ground at the same time. So look at the South Korean privacy regulators, or look at what has been an effort to reduce deep fake, non-consensual, intimate imagery abuses in the society. So the Koreans are actually regulating AI now on the ground. And that's a very important distinction. We see enforcement efforts, again, about deep fakes. And so that's a distinct difference between these two countries. Now, having talked about the differences, let's talk about the similarities. Number one, Japan, just like Korea, is also very interested in high-value manufacturers that includes chips. We saw the Japanese induce the Taiwan Semiconductor TSMC to their shores, and they have their Kumamoto fab up and running, and it's apparently a deep success. And so they want to also be on the chip production side, very upstream in this ecosystem. We heard the Prime Minister of Japan also say they want to be the most AI-friendly nation. Because why? They want to develop AI and they want to be able to deploy it as well. So that means that they'll need to focus on, again, those three input constraints: AI talent, AI compute, and AI data. I'm confident that they'll be able to work on the data piece. The Japanese have been very, very sophisticated in terms of working on data rules, particularly in a cross-border setting. So, for example, the Japanese within APEC were the ones who made the foray into the data free flow with trust concept, which allows you to transfer data across borders in a trustworthy setting so that it can't be used abusively. So I believe data is not going to be a problem. I think when it comes to talent, this will be an interesting one to look into. Japan, like many other East Asian countries, has a demographic issue. It's an aging society. And so where are you going to get this talent and how are you going to train it? I think they need to seriously consider leveraging how cool Japan is to the tech community to induce people to come and live. They have a digital nomad visa. Clearly, that's part of their strategy, but it's only 6 months, and I believe that they're trying to extend it out for 12 months. They need to attract more talent from outside of Japan into Japan, and that'll be one constraint. And I would say a third constraint here too, and it's tied to compute, is the issue of energy. So obviously we know that compute is very energy intensive to run these data centers. And so Japan, like many East Asian countries, Taiwan included, had moved away from nuclear energy because of the terrible Fukushima nuclear accident. And so if energy demands are going to increase 5%, 10%, they need to really think about their energy demands and maybe look back into nuclear. And of course, those discussions have been occurring. So I'll just leave it there for you, Rosie.
So we talked about South Korea and Japan, and let's focus a little bit on the biggest country that is in Asia, that is China. We've seen like the big shock that brought the DeepSeek revolution in China. So from your more professional view on this, how do you think, how far ahead is China at the moment compared to the other Asian countries, but also in general to the other countries in the world?
Sure. It was very interesting to see, the so-called DeepSeek shockwave that, took billions, billions of dollars off of the valuation for many American US listed companies, right? And so the narrative is been an interesting one. Number one, which is that it's not a tech firm, it's a hedge fund that had this kind of R&D team, very relatively small team, not super prestigious in terms of, where they were coming from. They didn't have some big names, from the Googles or the Microsofts leading them. And then, of course, there was the real sticker shock, which was, how cheaply they were able to train this model and get it deployed. And of course, it ranks fairly well. One of the things that I observed when it came out was, okay, put aside the potential for possibly having intellectual property infringement involved or unauthorized use to train the LLM itself. Put aside questions that people had about the actual low sticker price, and does that actually include all of the training of previous models that didn't work out? All the money that they had spent up till the point that they deployed that model. Put aside all of those questions. Once we saw the model on the market, internationally, what did that look like? And you saw privacy regulators, for example, in South Korea. You saw the government here in Taiwan. You saw the government in Australia. All of them put the brakes on this model. At first they said, okay, can't use it on government devices, and then it would accelerate from there and say, for example, in South Korea, the privacy regulator said, you can't have it downloadable for our population. And the reason why is governance. So I think that this really underscores the importance of AI governance. Irregardless of the rules, there are some really great guardrails out there about how you govern AI models. And that's something that they didn't pay attention to, right? when it came to privacy or when it came. So even though they were an open weighted model, no, they're not exactly an open model in the sense that we know open software, where all of the training data is well known and the documentation for the training is transparent. And then, of course, the transparency on the privacy side becomes more and more apparent. And then, of course, you've got other kinds of political things about, how it's fine-tuned to, let's say, not say offensive things about the Chinese Communist Party, what have you. So AI governance is extremely important, and AI governance is what's going to create winners and losers as we see us scaling up. Now, when it comes to China, DeepSeek all of a sudden has been found everywhere. And why is that? Because they're very good at AI governance for China. And I believe the regulators in China want DeepSeek to succeed. So, if there are any problems, you're going to see that those problems hopefully get ironed out. So long as DeepSeek, plays by the rules and, goes for a win-win within China's AI ecosystem. So is China ahead or not? Based on empirical evidence, looking at these LLMs, you saw China come in later than most others. They innovated on what was already there in a very Chinese way, which was ensuring that it's extremely efficient. And I was reading about some of the efficiencies that they found in their training code. They would go down to the assembly language level and find efficiency. Assembly language is essentially it's a one computer language above ones and zeros. It really gets into the architecture of the chip. And I remember as an undergraduate, I studied computer science, and I took assembly language. And from that point on, I realized that I definitely don't want to be a computer programmer. And the law definitely looked a lot simpler than computer programming at that point. But one thing that I do remember from those years programming, and this is in the 2000s or late 90s actually, was taking a course on artificial intelligence, computer programming. There was a specially designed computer language called Lisp, Lisp. And it was designed specifically to do recursion. And that was what AI was really focused on back then, which was just brute forcing everything. How did these big firms all of a sudden beat the world premier chess players and Go players? It was simply brute force. Now we're into a different era. But then we're beginning to see slower and slower gains. ChatGPT 5 has been slower and slower to come out. So is the LLM tech coming to an end? We don't know. Will there be other types of AI innovation out there? Yes. Could it be neurosymbolic type of AI? Probably. And will it be a combination of brute force and LLMs and some other form of trying to figure out neurosymbolic AI programming? Yeah, who knows? So I believe that when it comes to AI, useful AI, empirically, I think we can see with our eyes, China's definitely up there. It's got a very workable model. It's being deployed throughout different companies, but it's not like a AGI. It's not going to. I don't think it's going to take over our jobs yet.
Well, certainly not yours, given that you can do basically everything that's needed right now. So,
Well, I realize what I can do and what I don't want to do, and I think that's that's an important distinction.
fair enough.
Because these LLMs, right? The big problem with the LLMs is hallucination. It can do everything, according to it. One of the first things that I wrote we were quoted in The Economist early last year. We wrote a letter to the editor and we said, LLM hallucinations are not LLMs are not BSers, let's say. Rather, LLMs don't have intention. They are simply just they're predicting the next token. Even if you see papers that go back and forth about it, I'm not convinced. that there's much beyond that. And you see it again in the hallucinations. It's not really a bug, it's a feature of that kind of technology.
It's crazy to hear you talking about LMs and like at what stage each country is kind of experiencing this type of technology because um, political science is not a scientific, like we call it political science, but obviously you're looking at social phenomena. And that's not science in itself. If you think of physics, or if you think of maths, or if you think of computer science, where you look at a procedure, a process, for example, in the case of LLMs. And if you are a politician, so someone that's an expert or tries to be an expert in political science, you look at something like China and the US and you look at what they've achieved when it comes to AI, and you think, must be because they're big countries, must be because they have loads of money, must be because they have zero regulation, or at least it looks like it externally, because let's remember that then the specific case, even in US state, is not that way. It's not happening as they say it does. Um, so my question to you, who, I mean, you clearly are able to look at the structure behind it, is would a political scientist be right in interpreting this phenomenon as resting upon regulation or upon money? Or are smaller units, smaller countries, like Taiwan, for example, where you are, if we can call it a country,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
better off when it comes to innovation? Can they produce a better innovative solution rather than just a number of them?
Yeah, I certainly think that there is that possibility, right? So it's not just a matter of scale, like you're talking about the United States or China having that scale, being able to deploy that money, being able to consolidate a national industrial policy such that you can have, a $500 billion supercomputer, as was unveiled earlier this year in the United States, Stargate. Um, I believe that, well, let me just put a pin in that for a second and tell you something that my computer science professor told me back in school, which is that computer science, just like you're saying, political science, computer science is neither about computers nor is it about science. Which is worth knowing. This is when you're talking about code, it's mostly about logic and it's about how the empirical physical infrastructure of a computer, which is a series of computer chips, and how it interacts with human beings. So it's really a social science. Has more to do with uh, logic and philosophy, and ultimately, technology is always going to be socially constructed. They're really, take the bicycle, for example. There's really no bicycle that is truly, let's say, naturally occurring and the best. It's always socially constructed over time. And we've seen, bicycles change over hundreds of years. So I think talking about innovation policy is very important at the national level. And again, when we're talking about this debate, whether it's the US, let's say, putting the pedal to the metal, is China really focusing on its own? It's Europe, which is maybe having some anxiety about innovation versus regulation. And you certainly heard a lot of this anxiety at the recent Paris AI Action Summit. You had Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, essentially shaming his European hosts about the EU AI Act and regulations and saying this is tisk tisk, this is going to hamper your innovation. But then you had President Macron say, we will have a higher quality AI because of our regulation. I think that's a smart way to look at it. But even, you look historically, we don't necessarily look at Russia or the Soviet Union as being a very innovative country, right? And certainly during the Soviet era, Moscow produced, couldn't produce consumer goods for its people at very high quality or high rate. But at the same time, you look at the Cold War era, they got people into space first, before the Americans. And so, there's a question. You've got a lot of talent. Where does this talent go? It's always going to come back to people. And so I believe that it's very important to always have in mind the impact on people, the social construction of these technologies, and that's probably, I'm going full circle here for you. It's the reason why I studied the law, which was that as an undergraduate, I majored in science, technology, and society, kind of a liberal arts type of major where you study a little bit of everything. I got my computer science in, I got some biology in, but the sciences weren't as exciting as understanding how they apply to society. And that's what the law does. So for your listeners out there who are students of the law and who are interested in technology, this is an extremely vital area and very interesting area, and an important one. And it requires human beings on the ground. You don't have to be the engineer. Oftentimes, the lawyers, the regulators get scolded for not being technologists. So there's a sort of a chauvinistic emphasis on being the technologist, the engineer, particularly when it comes to computer science. They really think it's a science. Like I said, it's neither has nothing to do with computers nor science. You're not a scientist if you're working on AI. What you're doing is you're creating a technology. All technologies have regulations and guardrails around them, whether we co-opt existing regulations to help ensure that we build the societies we want. I think what's very important that my firm is doing these days is really looking at empirical harms created from AI. So we ignore the hype about hypothetical AI harms, that it's going to be the doomsday scenario. The AI is going to get loose. It's going to destroy all of our jobs, and it's going to eventually kill us. I think that's kind of a foolish way to look at the technology. Look at the empirical harms. I think the Koreans really have it going. They are utilizing the laws that they have, whether it's privacy laws, tort laws, and then they realize that where there are gaps in those laws, they need to fill them in order to take care of, let's say, non-consensual deepfake intimate imagery problems that they're having. And so I think that's where the innovation will be, is looking at where the rubber meets the road. I believe that small countries are going to be the best place to look at this because these are places where you can experiment. So, for example, in the United States, they banned TikTok because of its potential for algorithmic and political bias. Of course, it got a stay from the Trump administration because there are many donors to his administration who are also invested in TikTok. But look at what the Taiwanese and how the Taiwanese deal with TikTok. Okay, they don't allow it on government devices, but TikTok is downloadable and people in society can utilize it. So the way that they try to deal with the harms that maybe can be created from this technology is to try to educate the consumer or educate the public about misinformation, disinformation. And there are a lot of great civil society organizations here dedicated to that. And that's great innovation. So we don't have to just go one way or the other on these technologies. And we need to look at third countries, smaller countries, to figure out the best way to do it. What I try to do in my newsletter, it's called the Asia AI Policy Monitor. It's available on Substack. Is we try to identify what these smaller countries are doing in Asia, what their innovations are on AI regulation, whether it's in intellectual property, privacy, cybersecurity, military AI. We just try to put it out there because I find that oftentimes the debate is really focused too much on the big three, US, EU, and China. Can we get out of that space, get out of that headspace, and start looking at where others are doing great innovation in that regulatory lacuna.
Yeah. Amongst the legislative approaches that you've come across in Asia, do you see some policies that convinced you more? And also, we mentioned it before, the EU AI Act. Do you see a Brussels effect related to it? And how is it perceived in Asia?
It's a great question, and it's one that I was asked at last year's UN Internet Governance Forum in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Is there a Brussels effect from the EU AI Act? I believe that many countries are referencing it, yes, but I believe that that does not make it the Brussels effect that we recall from maybe 10 years ago with the GDPR, right? When the GDPR came out, the privacy regulation came out in Europe, that changed the infrastructure of the way that we are on the internet. If whether you are an American, Latin American, in Africa, all of a sudden you had to start clicking yes for cookies, this for, this kind of transparency about your privacy, right? They had to notify you about what they were doing with your data. That was a Brussels effect because it affected everything, regardless. And then we saw a number of countries look at the EU GDPR and say, okay, we'll take some of this model for ourselves. I believe that's the Brussels effect that we're all familiar with. For the EU AI Act, this has happened very quickly, much more quickly, and even before the EU AI Act was passed, other countries were already drafting their laws. So that's an important distinction. So rather than there being a causal relationship in time where GDPR happened and then it affected our everyday, and then everybody's playing catch up. Here with the EU AI Act, you're actually seeing things happen more or less at the same time. And when we're talking about legislation, it's multi-year pieces of legislation. Here in many countries in Asia, we just see countries coming online with their privacy rules. Even here in Taiwan, they're just establishing their privacy commissioner, which is long overdue. But again, a great example of how long it takes to catch up when you're not thinking about it. But here in Taiwan, they're thinking about their AI Basic Act, and it may pass shortly.
Wow, this is incredible to hear it because I mean, we are familiar with the idea of the Brussels effect. I mean, it was Anna Bradford who firstly brought it forward as a theory, and then everyone is like, no, Brussels effect, yes, Brussels effect, no, because the AI Act is too difficult to understand. And then there was the whole narrative coming from the United States. And it's great to hear that something that we got told on the podcast by some of our friends of the podcast, which is that you don't need to necessarily build up everything to make a good product. That has to be a qualitative choice rather than a quantitative choice. And what you were talking about in Asia is precisely that if you do create the right ecosystem of regulation, then the product, the AI that you will give birth to, if we can talk about birth, will be a better AI for society. And yes, as you say, technology comes from the Greek techne. It has something that has to be artificial, but artificial in the meaning of being made by a human. And if you don't have a human in the center, there is no artificial, there is just something.
Rosie, just talking a little bit about etymology. So in the Chinese, the word for artificial intelligence is 人工智能, or in Taiwanese, 人工智慧. So what's interesting about that, 人工, 人 is the Chinese character for person. 人工 means the work of a man, work of a person. Essentially being man-made. So really, at least in Chinese language, you can see that the person and the person's forging of these technologies is first and foremost. I mean, it's all about people.
It's all about people, and our people from the community cannot leave this podcast without knowing two specific things, which is one, can you give us a suggestion of a book, a TV series, literally anything that comes up to your mind, even a manga, of course, which can help them understand why Asia is moving in a specific direction when it comes to AI and other types of kind of digital and innovative new technologies. And please do remind our listeners, because this is super important, to read your Substack, which can be found, as we said, on Substack, which is called Asia AI Policy Monitor. And
Yes.
maybe they can also follow the APEC Gates organization that you have co-founded. So remind them a bit about this as well, because it's particularly important, I'm sure.
Well, and I'd also like to make sure I wave the flag for a nonprofit organization that I'm on the board of, which is the Asia Digital Governance. So it's at or rather, sorry, I'm getting my words mixed up here. Digital Governance Asia. So you can go to digitalgovernance.asia. That's our nonprofit organization. And we're trying to work on identifying AI harms as they exist here in the Asia Pacific region. And then that's also where we have the Asia AI Policy Monitor, which is available on Substack. And that's freely available. There'll never be a subscription payment for that. We really see that as a public interest, a public service to try to spread the knowledge about rules and regulations on AI in the region. And it's being staffed by man hours from my consultancy, APAC Gates. So welcome you to also go there and see some of the work that we've done, not only on AI policy, but also human rights and the role of business associations and the discussion on responsible business and human rights as it's being played out here in the Asia Pacific region. One last thing I would like to say is thank you, and thank you for giving us a little bit of time here to discuss what we do. I really appreciate it. It's been fantastic to be able to talk about what we do and a little bit about the future, and hopefully spur some interest in what's happening for policy outside of the big three. I would say one piece of literature that is very inspiring for me when it comes to my imagination for technology. It's, of course, a speculative fiction writer. I would recommend anything that he writes. But I want to posit it a little bit here because oftentimes we hear folks in the AI industry talk about how science fiction writers have inspired what they do, whether it's Heinlein or it's the classics, the classic science fiction writers. These are oftentimes white men, and so I encourage people to read science fiction that is not from that perspective. Whether it's the white British man or the white American man, go look outside of that perspective. And then you'll see that our imagination for technology really changes depending on your perspective. So one of my favorite science fiction authors that I've loved for all time is Octavia Butler. She's an African-American woman, passed away probably 15, 20 years ago. She has a great series of books, very inspiring, and gives you an idea and an imagination for how to exist in a world that is very difficult and very volatile and uncertain. Another science fiction writer that I encourage you to look into is, again, sorry for being an American, I'm going to give you two American names, is Ted Chiang. I believe he's Taiwanese American. Chiang, I believe. I'm sure I'll shoot you the email with a couple of links to his works. They've been a few of them have been adapted into movies. Uh, People may remember the movie Contact. That was based on one of his short stories, but all of his short stories are absolutely fantastic and can provide you with a very interesting imagination for what it means to be human in a technological society. Um, uh, yeah, those would be my two recommendations for your listeners.
Well, I have to say that now I have my bag ready and full of books for my 11-hour flight to Asia this summer. So thank you for finding me something to do. And
Sure.
this was all for this episode of Legal for Tech, the podcast. Thank you so much, Seth Hays, for joining us, and especially for the time difference. I mean, really, we appreciate it. And thank you, Giacomo, for joining me today.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, Seth.
Thank you. This was all.
Thank you.